Elias Harlow hadn't planned to leave the city that morning. At precisely 9:12 a.m., he was pacing his corner office on the 43rd floor of a glass-paneled building in Boston, earpiece in, tie barely loosened, and 3 assistants CC'd on every call. By 9:15, his voice was cutting through a budget negotiation that had already dragged on for weeks, and by 9:17, without a word of explanation, he ended the call mid-sentence, powered down his laptop, and walked out. No itinerary, no meetings, no destination, he just drove. The black Range Rover hummed beneath him like a loyal beast, eating up the miles as he left behind traffic lights and mirrored buildings. He turned off the interstate sometime around noon, somewhere between Bangor and nowhere, letting instinct steer the wheel. The further he got from the familiar, the easier it was to breathe. The truth was, Elias had been unraveling quietly for months. It didn't show, of course, not in his tailored suits or quarterly reports, but something inside him had worn thin, like thread pulled too tight for too long. His success was dazzling on paper, consultant to 3 Fortune 500 companies, keynote speaker in Dubai last spring, owner of a penthouse he rarely slept in. But behind the accolades was a gnawing exhaustion, a restlessness that even 10-figure deals couldn't quiet. He drove until the city gave way to pine trees and winding roads, the cell signal flickering like a dying flame. The asphalt narrowed, cracked in places, and the buildings thinned to the occasional antique shop or shuttered gas station. Just past a mossy bend in the road, he saw it, a cafe. It sat tucked between 2 skeletal maples, like it had been forgotten by time. Crooked porch, faded clapboard siding, and a hand-painted sign that read, "Renee's Place." One of the chains on the sign hung broken, swaying with the breeze. The parking lot was gravel, not pavement. 2 rusted cars sat by the side, and a metal trash can leaned drunkenly against the wall. He should have kept driving. This wasn't the kind of place Elias Harlow stopped at, not anymore. 10 years ago, maybe, but not now, not with his name in industry magazines and his face splashed across business journals. Still, he pulled in. There wasn't a conscious decision behind it, just a tug, something unspoken that told him this wasn't a detour, but a turning point. The air shifted the moment he stepped inside. No music, no bell above the door, no clatter of dishes or chatter of voices, just the low hum of a ceiling fan and the smell of brewed coffee, warm butter, and something sweet. Muffins, maybe. The sunlight slanted through grimy windows, casting golden lines across a handful of empty tables. It didn't feel abandoned, it felt paused. Elias walked slowly to a table near the window and sat down. The worn wooden chair creaked beneath him. He loosened his tie and rested his palms on the table, absorbing the stillness. The silence was deafening after months of constant notifications and ringing phones. He didn't check his watch. He didn't pull out his phone. He just sat. The kind of tired pressing on him wasn't about sleep. It was the fatigue of pretending, of performing, the weight of every smile he'd forced for shareholders, and every decision he'd made alone. He closed his eyes for what felt like a breath, and when he opened them, everything changed. Because standing in front of him, small, still, and impossibly steady, was a little girl no older than 6. She wore a red apron tied crookedly around her waist and held a notepad in both hands like a professional. Her long dark curls were pulled into a loose ponytail, and her brown eyes studied him with the calm of someone used to grown-ups she didn't quite trust. "What would you like to order, sir?" she asked, her voice soft but sure. Elias blinked, and for the first time in years, he didn't know what to say. Elias stared at the child in front of him, words caught in his throat. She stood so still, not fidgeting like kids usually did, her grip firm on the pen and pad. It didn't feel like a game, it felt like routine, like she'd done this 100 times before. I'll just have coffee," he said finally. "Black? Cream? Sugar?" she asked, already poised to write. "Black's fine," he replied, still caught off guard. The girl gave a small nod and turned on her heel with a kind of quiet efficiency that didn't belong on such small feet. Her bare ankles peeked out beneath faded jeans, and her sneakers were too big. Hand-me-downs, he guessed. Elias glanced around, expecting to see an adult nearby. Maybe the mother, maybe a cook at the counter, but there was no one, just the lingering scent of baked goods and the low creak of the fan blades slicing through the quiet. His gaze drifted toward the kitchen door. She disappeared behind an old swinging panel, worn soft on the edges by years of use. Something about her felt familiar. He couldn't explain it. It wasn't just the confidence or the way she had spoken so clearly. there was something else, something intangible, tickling at the edge of memory. The door swung open again. She returned carefully, both hands wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug that steamed at the brim. She walked with exaggerated caution, her lips slightly parted in concentration, as she balanced the cup on its saucer like it was made of crystal. "Here you go," she said, setting it gently in front of him. He noticed her fingers trembled just a little after she let go. "Not fear, fatigue. Thanks," he murmured, watching her more closely now. "Do you work here?" She gave a one-shoulder shrug. "Sort of. My mom does the cooking. I help out. We don't have anyone else." A pause. Elias leaned forward, brow furrowing. "You're here alone? Just you and your mom?" "Most days," she said simply. "Sometimes our neighbor helps clean the grill, but not always." Her tone was flat, not bitter, not seeking sympathy, just facts, like she was used to explaining it. He sipped the coffee. It was surprisingly good, bold, not burned. Better than the swill from his office machine. The warmth spread through his chest, but it didn't ease the knot forming in his stomach. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "Maddie." She didn't offer a last name. "Just Maddie. That's a nice name," Elias said. "I'm Elias." Maddie smiled, just a little, and just at the corners of her mouth. "You look tired," she said bluntly, not unkindly. "You should eat something." He almost laughed at her honesty. "You might be right." She straightened a bit, tugging at her apron. "We have soup, potato leek, and grilled cheese. Mommy says those are good for tired people." Her words hit harder than he expected. "Good for tired people. All right," Elias said quietly. "I'll have that." Maddie nodded again, and turned for the kitchen, but just before the door swung behind her, he called out, "Maddie." She looked back. "Would you mind asking your mom to come out, just for a second?" Her eyes narrowed just slightly, assessing. She nodded once, then vanished. Elias leaned back, suddenly aware of the way his heart had picked up speed. He didn't know why. Maybe it was the quiet of the place. Maybe it was Maddie's oddly familiar face. Maybe it was the way she'd looked at him, like she knew him somehow. Whatever it was, it stirred something he'd buried a long time ago. And when the kitchen door swung open again, nothing could have prepared him for what came next. The door creaked slightly on its hinges as it swung open, and Elias stood without meaning to. At first he wasn't even sure what he was looking for, just some vague confirmation of whatever strange feeling had started churning inside him the moment Maddie appeared. Then she stepped through. Renee. He hadn't said her name aloud in years, but it surfaced now like breath after drowning. She wore a simple apron over a soft green t-shirt, a smudge of flour streaking one cheek. Her auburn hair was piled into a messy knot, strands falling loose around her ears. A dish towel was slung over one shoulder. She moved with the ease of someone who'd been on her feet all day, but was used to it, and when she finally looked up, really looked, she froze. "Elias," her voice cracked on his name. She didn't ask if it was him. She didn't blink like she couldn't believe it. She just said it, like the word had been waiting behind her teeth for years. He stepped forward. "Renee." Silence fell again, heavy and stunned. It had been nearly 7 years. 7 years since he left a cramped apartment in Providence, whispering promises he didn't keep. 7 years since he told her he needed to chase something bigger, that she deserved more than what he could give. 7 years of no calls, no letters, no return. And yet here they were, standing 10 feet apart in a rundown roadside diner on a random Wednesday afternoon, staring like ghosts who suddenly found flesh again. Renee's breath came fast, but she didn't move, didn't scream, didn't cry. She folded her arms tightly, not defensive, more like she needed to hold herself together. Her eyes never left him, scanning his face as if she didn't trust what she saw. "What are you doing here?" she asked finally, voice low and steady. I don't know," Elias admitted. "I didn't plan to come. I just drove." She blinked slowly, processing. Then, without a word, she glanced toward the kitchen door, where Maddie had disappeared only moments earlier. Elias followed her gaze, heart pounding. "She's yours," he said, barely more than a whisper. Renee turned back to him, and this time her expression didn't waver. "She's ours." The words hit like a wave. No anger, just weight. Elias took a shaky breath and sat back down, because his legs suddenly felt like they wouldn't hold him. His fingers trembled slightly where they rested on the table. "I didn't know," he said. "God, Renee, I didn't know." "I tried to tell you once," she said, coming closer but not sitting. "You'd already changed your number, and after that, you stopped trying." "I had to choose her," she said simply, "and chasing down a man who'd already made his choice didn't help either of us." He swallowed hard. shame rising like bile. I would have come back, she nodded. Maybe, but would you have stayed? There it was, not bitterness, just truth. Her voice carried it the way people do when they've lived with the question long enough to stop asking it out loud. She doesn't know who I am, does she? He asked. Renee shook her head. Only that you were someone I used to love. Someone who left. He nodded slowly, the silence wrapping around them again. He didn't know what to say. What apology could cover 7 years? She has your eyes, he said finally. Renee looked away, and this time her arms didn't fold. They dropped loosely to her sides. I know, she whispered. Elias looked down at the untouched mug in front of him, the steam now fading. He had come in for coffee, but what he'd found was the life he never meant to leave behind. The bowl of soup was set down in front of him, without ceremony. Renee didn't ask if he wanted it anymore. She simply returned from the kitchen with it in her hands and placed it before him. Hot, fragrant, steam curling upward, as if to fill the silence neither of them quite knew how to cross. Elias stared at the soup for a moment. It looked homemade, thick and rustic, the way food only came when it wasn't meant to impress anyone. Next to it sat half a grilled cheese sandwich, golden and uneven at the edges, the kind of meal you made with care, but not with flourish. Across the table, Renee finally sat down, not directly across, one seat over, angled just slightly away from him, a small gesture of self-preservation. Close enough to talk, not close enough to hope. He picked up the spoon. It shook slightly in his hand before he steadied it. Potato leek? He asked, attempting something like normal conversation. Renee gave a tired nod. Maddie's favorite. It's simple, cheap, fills you up. He took a bite. It was good, really good. He'd eaten in Michelin-starred restaurants, sat across from CEOs over 5-course tasting menus, but somehow, this bowl of soup made his chest ache more than anything ever had. She's incredible, he said quietly. Renee's eyes flicked toward the kitchen. She is. They sat in that pocket of space, where words came slowly and memories crept in uninvited. Elias took another bite, the warmth grounding him. Renee didn't touch her own plate, just folded her hands in her lap, and watched the window where soft clouds drifted past behind layers of dust. She asked if I was tired, he said with a small laugh that barely held. Like she knew, she sees people, Renee said, really sees them, always has. Elias didn't respond. Instead, he watched the way Renee's fingers moved, subtle twitches, one thumb rubbing the other. Nervous, maybe, or simply out of practice being this close to someone who once mattered. He set his spoon down. She looks like you, but when she talks, Renee finally looked at him, eyes narrowing slightly. I know, you were pregnant when I left. I found out about a week later, she said. I was going to tell you, but you were already gone. Disconnected your number, moved. I didn't even know where you were, and by the time I tracked down your office email, I thought, maybe you didn't want to know. I did, Elias said instantly, leaning in. Renee, I swear, if I'd known. She held up a hand. Not harshly, but firmly. It doesn't matter now. He closed his mouth. The door creaked again. Maddie returned, this time carrying a tall glass of water balanced carefully on a small tray. She wore a proud little smile as she approached the table, her steps deliberate. Here you go, she said, placing the glass down in front of Elias with the flourish of a seasoned waitress. You forgot to ask for it, but Mommy says water's always good with soup. Elias smiled, his throat tight. Thank you, Maddie. Did I do it right? She asked, looking at her mom. You did great, sweetheart, Renee replied, her voice softening like cloth worn smooth by time. Maddie beamed, then turned and skipped off to a corner of the cafe where a stack of coloring books and crayons lay waiting. Elias watched her go, something inside him bending under the weight of what could have been. She's mine, he said quietly. Renee didn't flinch. She just nodded once, slow and steady. She is. And just like that, the world tilted, not completely, but enough. Elias returned 2 days later. He hadn't planned it, not consciously, but after that first visit, something inside him had refused to settle. Maddie's face, the way she'd asked if he was staying for lunch, replayed in his mind like a song he couldn't turn off. He didn't tell anyone at the office where he was going. He ignored emails, silenced his phone. For once, nothing in his professional world felt as urgent as whatever had started inside that little diner. This time he arrived before noon. Renee was behind the counter when he walked in. She didn't smile, didn't scowl, just looked at him with eyes that were a shade more open than before, like a door left slightly ajar. He wasn't sure if it meant welcome or warning. "I'm early," he said, unsure of what else to say. "You're here," she replied. Then she pulled a clean apron from a hook by the kitchen door and handed it to him. "You said you wanted to help." He took it, no hesitation, tied it around his waist like he had any idea what he was doing. That day, Elias learned more about running a diner than he ever imagined he would. He cracked eggs under Renee's supervision, half of them wrong. He burned a batch of toast and nicked his finger slicing tomatoes. He mopped the floor twice because the first time left streaks. And yet, he didn't complain once. He didn't want to be a guest. He wanted to belong. Maddie floated between the front room and the kitchen like a hummingbird, never still for long. She stirred pancake batter with serious concentration, stacked napkins with uneven care, and once stopped Elias mid-task to correct the way he was folding menus. "You gotta crease it right in the middle," she said, demonstrating with tiny, sticky fingers. Elias obeyed her instruction without question. To her, his presence was natural, effortless. She handed him kitchen tools and gave him updates on her latest crayon masterpiece, as if he'd always been there. No hesitation, no awkwardness, just pure unfiltered trust. That trust undid him. By the time the lunch rush trickled in, 3 older locals and a young couple passing through, Elias had earned a spot behind the counter, refilling coffee and carrying plates with slightly less fear of dropping them. Renee didn't say much, but she didn't stop him either. As the sun began to dip behind the trees, and the last customer left with a wave, Renee flipped the close sign on the door. The silence that followed felt different this time, less hollow, more like exhale. They gathered in the back booth, the 3 of them, sharing leftover grilled cheese slices and a slice of lemon pie. Maddie insisted was too tangy, but still awesome. Elias sat back, arms stretched across the booth, and let himself breathe. "You run this place every day?" he asked Renee, his voice soft. "Every day but Sundays," she replied. "That's Maddie's day off. We try to just be." He nodded, taking that in. "You're incredible. You know that." Renee didn't look at him right away. When she did, it wasn't with disbelief. It was something closer to fatigue. "Don't say things unless you mean them, Elias." "I do." Her eyes searched his face for something, genuineness, maybe, or weakness. Whatever it was, she didn't argue. She just looked away, wiping a crumb from the edge of the table. Maddie yawned, resting her head on her folded arms, eyes fluttering shut without ceremony. "She's out," Renee murmured. Elias watched his daughter, sleep. A smear of chocolate near her lip, a crayon tucked behind one ear. He'd missed so much. First words, first steps, first stories. But maybe he hadn't missed everything. Maybe he was right on time for something else. The following Sunday arrived wrapped in early sunlight and the kind of stillness that felt rare in Elias's world. He hadn't slept much the night before, not from stress, but something more electric. He was used to pressure, used to all-nighters, spent studying quarterly reports or rehearsing client pitches, but this was different. This wasn't work or strategy, this was anticipation. By 9:50 a.m., he was parked outside the diner, unsure whether to knock or simply wait. The sign on the door still read closed, but the familiar smell of something sweet baking drifted out through the cracked kitchen window. He barely made it halfway across the gravel lot before the front door burst open. "You're early," Maddie called, standing barefoot on the porch, pajama pants bunched at the ankles, a worn cartoon t-shirt clinging slightly askew on one shoulder. Her dark curls stuck out at odd angles, wild from sleep. She looked like a kid who hadn't yet remembered to be shy. Elias smiled, crouching slightly. "Couldn't wait." She grinned, all cheeks and missing teeth, then reached for his hand without hesitation. "We're making cinnamon pancakes, but only on Sundays. That's the rule." He let her lead him inside. The diner looked softer without its weekday clatter. Chairs were stacked neatly against the walls, counters wiped down. The whole space felt less like a business and more like a home waiting for breakfast. Renee stood at the griddle, apron already dusted with flour, flipping something in the pan. Her hair was tied back in a loose braid, a smear of batter marking her wrist. She looked up when they entered and gave him a nod. Not overly warm, but not cold either. "Morning," she said simply. "Morning," Elias replied, stepping into the space as if invited. "Hope you like bananas in your pancakes," she added, eyes back on the skillet. Maddie tugged Elias toward a small round table, already set with 3 mismatched plates and hand-painted mugs. One of them had a chipped rim and a red tulip painted near the handle. "This one's yours," she said proudly, pointing, "It's the best one." He sat down without argument. They ate slowly, no rush, no agenda, just syrup-drenched bites, and Maddie's non-stop chatter about a cartoon she liked, a stray cat she'd named Pretzel, and whether or not cinnamon counted as a vegetable if it came from a tree. Elias listened to every word, answering her questions like they were matters of state. Renee mostly observed, speaking only when prompted, but her eyes lingered longer now when she looked at Elias, watching him laugh, watching him pass the juice, watching him lean in to hear Maddie better. After breakfast, Maddie insisted he come sit on the floor with her by the window. She pulled out a plastic bin of crayons and construction paper, and together they began drawing what she called very serious masterpieces. Elias followed her instructions carefully. Clouds must have faces, suns must wear sunglasses, and no dog could be drawn without a name tag. Renee watched them from the kitchen doorway. She didn't interrupt, didn't hover, but she didn't leave the room either. Later, after Maddie had wandered off to play in the back, Renee sat down across from Elias near the window. They didn't speak at first. The radio played something old and soft, and outside the trees swayed gently in the breeze. "She's never had a man in her life," Renee said at last, her voice quiet. "No uncles, no granddad, just me." Elias nodded. "I want to be there, for her, for real." "She's already getting attached," Renee said, "and if you leave again, I won't." Elias interrupted, steady and sure, "I'm not going anywhere." She didn't respond immediately, but when she finally met his eyes, she didn't look away, and that, Elias thought, might have been the beginning of forgiveness. The first snow fell just after dusk, in early December. It wasn't the dramatic kind of snow that blanketed roads or shut down towns. It came in soft flurries, light, steady, unhurried, the kind of snowfall that made streetlights glow a little warmer and made the world feel quieter. Inside the diner, the last customer had just left, leaving behind an empty pie plate and a $5 tip tucked under a salt shaker. Renee moved slowly as she wiped the counter, humming an old tune Elias didn't recognize. Maddie was curled up in a booth by the window, fast asleep under a faded quilt, a book slipping from her lap, and a toy reindeer clutched in one hand. Elias stepped out from the kitchen, his sleeves rolled up, and a dusting of flour on his jeans. He hesitated for a moment, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a slightly worn manila folder. He set it on the counter beside Renee's elbow. She stopped wiping. "What's that?" she asked without turning. "Legal paperwork," Elias said gently. "Joint custody, nothing aggressive, nothing pushy, just real." Renee looked at the folder like it had teeth. "I'm not trying to take her," he added. "I just don't want to be a visitor in her life, not someone who drops in and out. I want her to know she has a dad, one that shows up, one that signs the school slips and waits at the dentist's office and doesn't just exist in weekend pictures." Renee said nothing. Outside, snow clung gently to the windowsills. Inside, the silence stretched, not tense, just full. "I know I'm asking a lot," Elias continued, "but I'm not trying to rewrite the past. I just want a place in the future." Renee finally turned to look at him. Her face wasn't angry, it was something softer, sadder. "She already thinks you're her dad," she said. "She tells people that now, at school, at the grocery store." She drew a picture of the three of us and taped it to the fridge. He swallowed hard. "She did," Renee nodded. "Stick figures. Yours was the tallest. She gave you glasses, even though you don't wear them, said you looked smarter that way." Elias laughed softly, the sound catching in his throat. Renee tapped the folder with her finger. It's a lot of change. Even good change is still change." "I know," he said. "You don't have to decide tonight, or tomorrow. Just read it, sit with it." She nodded, then gently slid the folder aside, not dismissing it, just placing it somewhere real. That night, they didn't eat in the diner. For the first time, Renee invited Elias upstairs, to the small apartment above the cafe. It was modest, lived in. The furniture didn't match, and the linoleum curled a little at the edges, but it smelled like cinnamon and pine, and something deeply human. They ate reheated stew at a narrow kitchen table, while Maddie snored softly on the pull-out couch nearby. After dinner, Elias helped clean the dishes, then sat on the rug, while Maddie woke just long enough to ask if he'd read her the rest of the story. They started earlier. He did, all the way through. Afterward, Renee stood by the door, arms crossed, watching him like she couldn't quite believe this was real, like it might all slip away in the morning. "You've changed," she said quietly. He looked at her, steady. "So have you." She nodded. "But you're still the same too, the parts that mattered." I wish I'd come back sooner. Renee's gaze softened. If you had, maybe you wouldn't have been ready. They stood in that quiet moment, not holding hands, not leaning in, just breathing the same air. We're getting there, she whispered. All of us, just keep showing up. I will, Elias said. I'm here for good, and for the first time she didn't flinch when he said it. Winter settled in like a deep exhale. The snow came heavier in late December, turning the trees along the roadside into sculptures of white, and the diner into something out of a postcard. Elias began arriving before sunrise, helping Renee shovel the walkway, string lights across the porch, and prepare the daily chalkboard specials before the first customer's boots hit the floor. He never announced his visits anymore. He didn't need to. He was simply part of the rhythm now. Inside the diner, Maddie drew new family portraits weekly, always 3 people, always under a sun, with too many rays. Sometimes she drew a dog they didn't own, sometimes a house with a treehouse they hadn't built yet. But always, with certainty, there was a man with brown hair, taller than the rest, labeled in blocky letters, Dad. Renee found the newest one taped beside the napkin dispenser. She stared at it for a long moment, before smiling, soft and almost disbelieving. That night, after the last snow-covered guest had gone, and Maddie had fallen asleep in the apartment upstairs, Elias stayed behind to wipe tables and count the drawer. The lights were low. The world outside was a quiet blur of flurries. Renee stood by the register, sipping from her favorite chipped mug. The silence between them was easy now. I've been thinking, Elias said finally, drying his hands on a dish towel, about how we got here, how this place pulled me in like it always knew something I didn't. Renee smiled faintly. You mean how my diner is secretly magical? He chuckled. Something like that. He moved toward her slowly, pulling a folded slip of paper from his pocket. It wasn't a ring box, it wasn't flashy, just something handwritten, real. I know we've taken things slow, and I'm not rushing you, but this past month, being here, with you, with her, it's shown me what I've been missing, what I want to build. She looked at the paper, then back at him, curious but calm. What are you saying, Elias? I'm saying that I want more than weekends, more than being the guy who just shows up. I want to build a life, a real one, not out of guilt or obligation, but out of love, the kind I never stopped carrying, even when I was too proud to admit it. Renee didn't speak right away. Her fingers tightened slightly around the mug, then loosened. I need time, she said softly, not because I don't feel it too, but because I want to say yes with both feet on the ground, and I'm getting there. Every day, I'm getting there. Elias nodded, not even slightly disappointed. That's more than enough. She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time in years, the walls behind her eyes weren't barriers, they were windows. On Christmas morning, the diner stayed closed. Inside the upstairs apartment, the 3 of them sat in their pajamas around a makeshift tree, half ornaments, half construction paper stars. Maddie tore open presents with wide eyes and squeals that filled the small space like music. Elias took photos, not for social media, just for remembering. Renee made cinnamon rolls and burned the first batch. They ate them anyway. They played board games on the floor, sang off-key to holiday music, fell asleep under the same blanket during a movie they didn't finish. There were no big speeches, no declarations, just presence. Later, as snow thickened on the windowsill, and Maddie dreamed beside them on the couch, Elias reached over and gently took Renee's hand. She let him, and that more than papers, more than rings, was the clearest promise either of them could make. They hadn't gone back to the beginning, they'd started something entirely new, together.